Welcome, you curious minds, to another deep dive. Today, we're plunging into, well, a really profound and often misunderstood topic, developing stream entry. We're pulling our insights from a powerful text by Bhikkhu Anīgha, specifically their work titled Developing Stream Entry from Hillside Hermitage. Our mission today really is to cut through some of the common misconceptions floating around about spiritual awakening, particularly about that first big breakthrough, stream entry. We'll explore what genuine understanding really means here, how progress actually unfolds, and why some popular approaches might surprisingly be roadblocks on your path.
Yeah, what really struck me about this source is how it just flips some of our kind of long-held assumptions about spiritual insight completely on their head. It's not just about what you experience, but fundamentally about the quality of your understanding. We're going to try and clarify that vital difference between genuine insight and, well, mere perception.
Okay, so let's dive right into the core of this challenge the source presents. It immediately confronts us with a really widespread misunderstanding. This idea of stream entry as a, sudden, unprovoked revelation, epiphany, or mystical glimpse. People often seem to mix it up with unusual perceptions and experiences.
Right. And this brings up a really important question for anyone on a spiritual path. What exactly is the difference between a perception and true understanding, or panyai, as it's called? The source is remarkably clear on this. Genuine understanding needs effort. It requires work. It's not something that just sort of spontaneously pops up. Think of it like learning to assemble a complex machine, maybe a car engine. Nobody just wakes up knowing how to do it.
Yeah, no, definitely no.
You have to actively try to understand. You have to engage with it, figure out how the parts work together. So a seasoned mechanic's deep grasp of an engine is fundamentally different from someone just having intricate, maybe even vivid visions of pistons and gears without any prior effort or study.
Ah, okay. So it's not about having complex visions or, esoteric experiences, even things potentially brought on by, say, psychoactive drugs, as some people might think.
Exactly.
The source explicitly says these are just perceptions, no matter how sophisticated or profound they might feel at the time.
Precisely. And unlike perceptions, which can be, highly subjective, personal, true understanding in the context of the Dhamma, the Buddhist teachings, the natural law they describe it isn't individualized like that. It's either aligned with the Dhamma, which means it genuinely leads to the destruction of ignorance and craving, or it's actually a misunderstanding. And if it's that, well, ignorance and craving are unfortunately going to persist.
Okay, now this next point really reframes how we tend to think about progress on this path. Forget the idea of instant enlightenment. Poof.
Yeah, the lightning bolt idea.
Exactly. The sources emphasize that progress, whether it's aiming for stream entry or even later stages, is always necessarily gradual. It really boils down to the weakening of the fetters. These fetters being like the mental chains, those underlying defilements and attachments that bind us to suffering.
And this gradual weakening, it's a process you just can't rush. You can't really anticipate it either. The source uses some really beautiful analogies from the Buddha's own teachings to illustrate this. Think about the ocean, for instance. It gradually slants, slopes, and inclines. There's no abrupt precipice, as the texts say.
Right, just a slow, steady deepening.
Exactly. Or think of a carpenter's adze handle, the tool they use.
Yeah.
It wears away over time, subtly, day by day. The carpenter doesn't measure the tiny bit worn off each day. They just know it's worn away once the process is complete.
Yeah.
And similarly, a bhikkhu, a monk or nun, committed to spiritual development, they don't know precisely how much defilement was worn away today or yesterday. The text says he only knows they've worn away once they've already worn away.
I see.
It's also compared to a ship's ropes, slowly deteriorating in the water, then weathered by wind and sun, eventually just weakening and decaying. It's that kind of slow, inevitable process.
Okay, that makes sense for most people's journey, I suppose. But what about those vivid stories we sometimes hear, even in the ancient texts? People encountering the Buddha and seemingly attaining insight almost on the spot. How does that fit with this gradual idea?
That's a good question. The sources explain that their starting point was just different. These were individuals who, for whatever reason, already had significantly weaker fetters holding them back, or maybe stronger spiritual faculties developed from past efforts. They were described like lotuses just under the water's surface, ready to rise.
Oh, okay. Poised for it.
Exactly, poised. Whereas for most of us today, let's be honest, we're probably still quite far down at the bottom, which just means there's much growth ahead through diligent, steady practice.
So, okay, given that it's gradual and we can't force the final insight, what can we actively control? What's within our agency here?
Well, what we do have tangible control over is feeding or starving one's defilements. That choice is always there. And sufficiently starving them consistently is precisely what unlocks the possibility for understanding to arise.
Okay, starving the defilements. What does that look like in practice?
It means deeply understanding ignorance itself, what it is, where it comes from, how it ceases, and the practice that leads to its end, which is, of course, the Noble Eightfold Path. Ignorance ceases when these defilements cease. That's laid out clearly in the texts. And the source lists specific defilements we need to work on giving up. Things like longing, immoral greed, ill will, anger, resentment, jealousy, conceit, arrogance. The list goes on.
All the usual suspects that cause trouble.
Pretty much.
And
giving these up, gradually weakening their hold, leads to this absolute confidence in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, which in turn naturally brings about a profound sense of gladness, joy, calm, comfort, and composure. It's a positive feedback loop.
And this isn't just about sitting down for formal meditation practice, is it?
Oh, not at all. That's a key point. The source highlights what's called sequential training. And that's really about purifying the mind by letting go of unwholesome actions and mental states right in the midst of daily life.
Okay.
It's about knowing consciously, on a per-case basis, that your continuous effort, moment to moment, is actually leading to the decrease of sensuality, the craving for existence, and ignorance itself. And it's crucial, the text stresses, not to leave any gaps.
What does that mean, leave gaps?
It means don't just try to give up the big things you think are obstacles. Even a sotapanna that's a stream enterer, someone who's really entered the path, they only succeed partially at first because they give up what they're consciously aware of. So tolerating even subtle forms of craving, thinking, oh, that's just a small thing, that's actually a significant impediment to further progress. You have to be thorough.
Got it. So it's about relentlessly making space, clearing the ground for what the texts call full right view to eventually arise.
Precisely. It's like that farmer analogy again.
Right.
The farmer diligently plows, tills, and plants. They do all the necessary work.
Right.
But they can't stand there and command the crops to ripen faster.
Yeah, that's up to nature.
Exactly. Or the hen incubating her eggs. She doesn't sit there wishing for chicks to hatch. She just incubates properly, provides the right conditions.
And then they hatch when they're ready.
Right. The work itself will yield results when enough has been done, when the conditions are fully met. And this work includes consistent training in higher virtue, higher mind, and higher wisdom, the whole package.
Okay, this next insight from the source. Wow. It might really shift your perspective, make you think. It states that your present understanding of the Dhamma and practice is what stands in the way of your attainment of the right view. That's quite a statement.
It is, isn't it? It really challenges our assumptions. Because people often assume they just need, more experiences or maybe some profound insights to confirm what they think they already knew intellectually. They want validation for their existing framework without fundamentally changing their core assumptions.
Right, fitting new data into the old box.
Exactly. But the source says the knowledge of the right way of practice is what is acquired at stream entry. The stream itself is the Noble Eightfold Path. And it's only from stream entry onwards that one has access to it in its complete sense, because all its factors, all 8 parts, hinge fully on right view. Without that correct view, the other parts don't fully function as intended.
Whoa. So if you think you already understand the practice correctly before stream entry, you're actually blocking yourself. That seems so counterintuitive.
Yes, that's exactly what the source implies.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a paradox. As one text puts it, someone unable to enter this sure path might think they understand what they don't understand.
Holding on to a misunderstanding.
Precisely. Because right view isn't just, intellectual agreement with Buddhist concepts. It's about fundamentally rectifying your interpretation of core Dhamma terms. Take suffering or craving. A puthajjana, an ordinary person, not yet on that sure path, often interprets these quite vaguely, or maybe even wrongly.
Like thinking suffering is only major tragedies, not the subtle dissatisfaction of change.
Exactly like that. Or thinking craving is only for sense pleasures, not for existence itself or non-existence. A sotapanna, on the other hand, understands these terms exactly as the Buddha intended them. And the real measure of this alignment is no longer being liable to fall into states of suffering.
Okay, so it boils down to this. The problem isn't the external situation itself, but our craving in relation to whatever situation arises.
Spot on. That's the core misunderstanding the source points out. The common misinterpretation is that craving is only given up when the objects that might induce it are no longer present. Like if I avoid things I like, I've dealt with craving.
Right. Controlling the environment.
Yes. And this leads to nibbana, ultimate liberation, being misconceived as some kind of altered state where the contents of experience are entirely different, like a blissful void or something.
Yeah, I've heard descriptions like that.
But the source clarifies nibbana is the cessation of passion, craving, being, ownership, and anxiety in the face of whatever is experienced. It's about the relationship to experience, not the content of experience.
That's a huge difference.
It is. And many practitioners, the source suggests, may verbally say they don't have right view yet, but they often continue to practice as if they do. They keep building on their existing assumptions. It's like building higher and higher, but in the wrong spot. All that effort, but the foundation is misplaced.
Okay, so if that's the case, our practice before stream entry shouldn't just be about doing mindfulness exercises or whatever we think the practice is, but it should involve rigorously questioning what it truly is. Like going back to the absolute basics, the blueprint.
Precisely. That's the radical implication here. You need to cultivate a willingness, a readiness to potentially scrap all of your assumptions about the Dhamma down to the most basic and elemental.
Wow. Scrap all assumptions.
It's a deep kind of training, yes. But perhaps not the kind of training most people are initially eager to undertake. We like feelings. We know things.
True. It's uncomfortable.
Very. Think about a total newcomer to a sport, maybe tennis. Their initial training isn't the same as an elite athlete preparing for a championship, is it?
No, of course not. They need basics. Footwork, grip.
Exactly. They need to build a solid foundation, do those perhaps unexciting mobility drills, take fundamental technique lessons. If they just jump in trying to win matches immediately, they'll likely reinforce incorrect habits or even injure themselves.
Right. Bad form gets ingrained.
Just so. Asotapanna has acquired the fundamentals by truly understanding them, and then they can focus on further development of the path factors. That's why they are specifically called a trainee, a sekha. They are training on the path now. The source clearly highlights the key elements, like the awakening factors, the 5 spiritual faculties, the Noble Eightfold Path itself. These are acquired by Asotapanna upon reaching right view. They aren't things a Puthujjana develops in order to become one. The development follows the acquisition of right view.
Okay, that clarifies the role of practice and view. Now, as we consider this intense inner work, there's another crucial element the source emphasizes, one that's maybe often overlooked or misunderstood, the role of faith. The texts, they actually define a Sotapanna not primarily by some mystical fruition experience, but by 4 specific factors, and faith is central.
Yes, and this immediately raises an important question. What kind of faith are we talking about here? It's certainly not about blind piety or, unquestioning religious zeal. That's not the Buddhist sense of sada. Its purpose, as described in this source, is purely pragmatic. It's functional. Faith puts you in a position to be willing to question and revise your actions, views, and assumptions to align them with the Buddha's teaching further.
So it fuels the questioning process we just talked about.
Exactly. It gives you the confidence to trust the guide, the Buddha, the Dhamma, enough to actually reconsider your own map. The 4 defining factors for a stream enterer are this absolute confidence, unshakable conviction in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, the community of noble practitioners, along with possessing virtues dear to the noble ones, meaning a solid ethical foundation.
So it's really about diligent effort, ethical conduct, and this willingness to be guided by the teaching, not just an abstract intellectual belief.
Precisely. Wisdom or intuition alone, the source warns, can be subtly biased by craving. If this kind of pragmatic faith, this confidence in the path, is neglected or weak. Right faith and right understanding are actually presented as totally inseparable. They support each other. Well, that unshakable confidence is seen as a natural and necessary byproduct of comprehending the Four Noble Truths correctly. So conversely, if your faith feels less than unshakable, if you still have significant doubts about the core teachings, that's an indirect sign that the Four Noble Truths have not really been understood at that deep transformative level.
Okay, that makes sense. So for those of us, the vast majority, who aren't Sotapannas, how do we cultivate this kind of functional faith and the understanding it supports?
Well, a Puthujjana, an ordinary person, can and really should operate with the humble understanding that what they currently think is in line with the Dhamma may well ultimately not be.
Holding views lightly.
Yes, holding them provisionally. They should cultivate a readiness to take advice, even advice that goes against the grain of their preferences, advice that challenges their comfort zone. This allows them to eventually abandon deeply cherished wrong views. There are quotes referenced about needing this willingness, this kind of functional faith, this trust in the possibility of a truth beyond one's current grasp, is described as the nutriment for attention from the origin. Yoniso manasakara.
What's that again?
It means wise attention or appropriate consideration, looking at things in line with how they actually are, tracing them back to their roots. Faith fuels that deeper kind of looking.
Okay, this all sounds like, well, incredibly hard work. Challenging cherished notions, confronting defilements, cultivating this radical openness. What on earth is the ultimate spark, the motivation for this kind of transformative faith?
It's fascinating, isn't it? And the source's answer, drawn directly from the text, is starkly simple. Suffering.
Dukkha.
Suffering itself. Yes, the raw experience of it. The text says if you find yourself overpowered by suffering, you essentially have two paths. You either grieve, despair, become bewildered.
Fall apart, basically.
Right. Or you come to search outside. Who knows a way or two to the cessation of this pain? That desperate search, that profound sense of urgency to cure oneself, that is the requisite condition for true faith in the path to arise.
So in a way, the biggest hurdle isn't the difficulty of the path, but actually complacency, feeling okay enough.
Absolutely. Complacency is lethal to progress here. The sources are incredibly clear on this. There is no room for contentment or satisfaction with one situation for as long as one isn't at least a sotapanna.
Wow, no room at all.
None. The Buddha apparently urged even noble disciples, those already on the path, not to be satisfied until they reached full liberation, always striving further. The urgency required is likened to realizing one's clothes or head were ablaze.
You wouldn't just sit there.
Exactly. You'd exert utmost desire, effort, to extinguish the flames immediately. The Four Noble Truths, the reality of suffering and its end, demand that same level of life or death urgency.
That's intense.
It is.
Yeah.
There's another striking image. Imagine being struck by 300 spears every single day for 100 years.
Ouch.
Right. But with the absolute promise that at the end of that ordeal, you would finally comprehend the Four Noble Truths. The text says, for someone truly intent on their own benefit, on ending suffering, this is sufficient reason to submit to such an ordeal. That's the value placed on understanding.
It puts things in perspective.
It really does. The amount of suffering one has already endured through countless past lives is compared to the entire Himalayan mountain range eroded down to just 7 tiny mustard seeds.
Almost incomprehensible.
Right. And the suffering remaining for a Sotapanna, who has at most 7 more lives before full liberation, is minuscule in comparison, like those 7 mustard seeds. So the achievements of a noble disciple, someone who has entered the stream, are considered vastly greater than those of other spiritual seekers outside this path. But getting there requires relentless exertion. There's that famous quote reflecting the Buddha's own resolve. Gladly would I let the flesh and blood in my body dry up, if I have not attained what can be attained through manly fortitude, manly effort, manly striving. There will be no relaxing my effort.
So no half measures.
No half measures. Full commitment driven by the recognition of suffering and the possibility of its end.
Okay. So wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you, our curious listener, trying to navigate your own path? This deep dive has hopefully clarified that developing stream entry isn't about passively waiting around for some sudden mystical zap.
No waiting game.
Right. It's an active, definitely gradual process.
Yeah.
It involves purifying the mind in daily life, rigorously questioning our deepest assumptions about the Dhamma, even the ones we like, and developing this unwavering, very pragmatic kind of faith, a confidence born from the genuine urgency to truly understand and end suffering.
Yeah, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, it really suggests that genuine spiritual progress isn't primarily about collecting novel experiences or altered states. It's much more about fundamentally transforming our understanding, our view, and aligning it with reality as described by the Dhamma. It's about doing the often difficult, unglamorous inner work to create the space for right view to eventually emerge, rather than trying to somehow shrink right view down to fit into our current limited perspective.
That's a great way to put it. So this leaves us with an important question for you to ponder as you go about your day, your practice, your life. In your own journey of learning and growth, whatever field it's in, what cherished assumptions might you need to be willing to scrap? And what form of suffering, maybe dissatisfaction, confusion, or that sense of urgency we discussed might actually be the very fuel you need for your next leap of understanding? Something to think about.